Good morning, everybody. As Claire said, I'm Lynn Zentner. I'm the Managing Director at the Network for Computational Nanotechnology. We're the organization that runs the Science Gateway, or the HUB, nanoHUB. I'm also a co-PI on the grant that currently funds our hub. And I'm going to kind of reshare with you a presentation that I did about a month and a half ago at an International Science Gateways workshop. And my focus in that talk was on community building, and so I'll share a nice use case we had with a community building story, and also I have some slides at the beginning that do give the history and kind of some of the things we're working on with nanoHUB. So with that, I'll go ahead and move forward, except I just fell asleep, sorry. Forgot to turn my caffeine on, so I'll have to keep my cursor moving. All right, so short history of nanoHUB. It's been around for many, many years. We're pretty much the granddaddy of all hubs that are based on HUBzero. The germ of the idea for nanoHUB started in the mid-1990s with something called Punch. It was the brainchild of Mark Lundstrom, a faculty member here at Purdue, and it was basically a way for him to share code without exchanging disks through the mail or tapes, and a way to update code for users without, again, having to push updates to them on media. So that kind of moved along for a couple of years. Punch turned into nanoHUB in the late 1990s, and in 2002, the Network for Computational Nanotechnology was formed with an official grant from NSF, our first grant to fund the development of this hub. And so that started in 2002. So back 2004, we were looking somewhere of the order of 1,000 users. And at that point, it was only code. There was none of the collaborative features or other resources available on the hub, simply code and tools. A couple years later, the Rapture Toolkit was developed, which lowered barriers to developers and also lowered barriers for users because it then allowed the graphical use of inputs and outputs. We accelerated quite quickly after that. So you see about 2007, we actually birthed HUBzero out of nanoHUB. So a lot of people kind of think it's the other way around, that HUBzero was formed and then all these hubs were formed off of it. But it, in fact, was the opposite. nanoHUB came first. The utility of it became clear across different science domains, and that's when HUBzero was formed in 2007 with the encouragement and the support both within Purdue and of NSF. So we continue along, accelerating at a great pace, moving to 100,000 users about 2000, and continued to be funded on that original NSF grant until 2012. So we're on a 10-year grant. It was initially a 5+5, so it was renewed 5 years in. And then about 5 years ago, NSF saw the importance of the hub to the nanotechnology community, did a recompete both for the infrastructure itself, and they broke out. We used to manage all the content within the NCN grant, and they broke out the content into standalone grants, and so that happened in 2012. We're coming up on the end of a first 5-year grant, and we have a renewal proposal into NSF, hoping they'll extend us for another 5 years moving forward. On the top of this chart that you see here up at the top, you see some of the impact that we track with nanoHUB. So it's been very important to us to show progress both to external users, to sponsors, to basically any stakeholders that nanoHUB has true impact on science. One of the ways we do that is we have a semi-automated process to find references to nanoHUB in the scientific literature. So we run a Google Scholar alert on keywords like nanoHUB, any unique tool and code names that we have, and pull in those papers that we find that reference nanoHUB. We put those through a secondary set of review to make sure they truly are solid scientific references to nanoHUB. And we also collect more data on those references. We want to know things like, is this paper an internal paper, or are they external users outside of Purdue or outside of these content nodes? We want to know what kind of research people are doing. Is this paper about straight nano research? Is it about cyber infrastructure? Is it about education? We want to know, are experimentalists using the theoretical computational tools on nanoHUB in their work? So we go through and we vet the papers as far as their true nanoHUB content and scientific use, as well as collect all that secondary metadata. And we use that then to present impact for nanoHUB. So about 2011, we had 720 citations to nanoHUB. I think now we've got about 1,800. We track the relative H-index as if nanoHUB was a participant in this research. It's gone from 2011 about 31, now it's about 80. So compared to, nanoHUB, you figure, has been in business 15, 20 years. A researcher 15, 20 years out of their PhD might have an H-index of 20 to 30. So nanoHUB at 80 is clearly having impact on the research community. We also track whether or not there is orchestrated use of nanoHUB in classrooms, and we do that through some algorithms that look at relative behavior in our usage data. And we see nanoHUB used, again, in 2011, we had about 14,000 students in 760 classes. I believe we've about doubled that. We're at about 30,000 students in something like 1,500 classes. And you see that data there near the end of the slide. So kind of that's the history of nanoHUB, the walkthrough. We have made a change the way we count users, and we've gone to a more modern version. We used to count users to the site, so the 1,000 users, the 100,000 users. We counted them in a very conservative way. They had to come to the site. They had to have meaningful interactions with the site, which meant that they actually were on the site for a period of 10 to 15 minutes watching a video or using a tool. In today's web format and culture, people are downloading things, they're streaming things, and that type of counting doesn't make as much sense anymore. Most websites count in terms of visitors, so we do that as well now, and we're on the order of 1.4 million visitors to nanoHUB per year. So kind of to summarize nanoHUB's history, the problem was, how do we share code with a colleague? That evolved into this web platform for primarily simulation code, but we added this and more content to support it. All these educational materials came a few years later, and we did see our viewership, our usership skyrocket with that. Out of those 1.4 million users, visitors to nanoHUB in a year, maybe 15,000 of them are running simulation tools. So a huge portion of our visitors are coming for that other educational content. Rapture Toolkit allows developers and users to lower barriers and easily access simulation code, so people don't have to be computational geeks to run code on nanoHUB. Something new that we're looking into further to lower barriers, across science fields, there's some familiarity with Jupyter Notebooks. The computer science people all know about Jupyter Notebooks, so that's interesting when we talk to our boards. The science boards say, oh gosh, what are those? They sound really interesting. And the cyber infrastructure boards go, oh yeah, we know all about notebooks. It's great that you're doing it. So Jupyter Notebooks are if you're not familiar with them, a very low-touch, easy, interactive way for people to not only access code, but other materials. So they're a really neat learning tool, and we've incorporated a version of those on nanoHUB. So some fast facts about nanoHUB. We currently host over 5,000 resources. About a tenth of those are tools, so that kind of corresponds to our usership. 1.4 million visitors annually, about 16,000 simulation users, running over a million simulations per year. And then over 30,000 users using tools in formalized classrooms that we can track with these automated algorithms. And I mentioned the papers in the literature and the H-index. So you put up an infrastructure, a hub, a science gateway. It goes nowhere without your ability to build a community around that hub or around that science gateway. And there's some keys to build and maintain a community that we've learned with nanoHUB. One really important thing is to understand who your users are, what they do, what they need. And so across nanoHUB, the majority of our users are students. They may be in a formal classroom setting. They may be independent learners. They may be graduate students doing research. So we see overlap in these categories I've got here. Same thing with educators. Educators may be coming to get materials to teach, or they may be coming to get state-of-the-art materials for their own personal learning. Educators, faculty, they're educators and researchers. And then we have industry professionals. They sometimes come to do some back-of-the-envelope calculations, but primarily our industry professionals come for the materials. A lot of them use the materials on nanoHUB for professional development and kind of staying up to date on state-of-the-art. When you're building a community, you need to make sure that you have ways that they can communicate their needs to you. So on nanoHUB, we find ways to take their pulse. We run surveys, we run micro-surveys. We're thinking about incorporating more micro-surveys into the structure of the hub. So that's one of our goals, along with Jupyter Notebook development, is to engage on a more real-time basis with our users. If they're sitting waiting for a tool run to complete, why don't we ask them a question? You know, why are you here? What are you doing? Who are you? And people, we had been hesitant 10 years ago to do things like that. But people are more receptive in the web environment to those kind of interactions than they used to be. So we worry less about bothering people. We also do run formal surveys. In fact, I had a summer intern working with me this summer, and he was very interested in the business side of nanoHUB and kind of assessing customer needs and that sort of thing. And we have in the past at nanoHUB engaged 3 times with MBA groups coming out of Purdue's Krannert School of Management for a semester-long experiential learning project. So Krannert looks for companies that are willing to put a problem in front of their MBA students and let the MBA students work on it. And so we've done 3 of these now with the MBA students, and each time a slightly different focus building on the prior group's work. But each MBA class has started by surveying the nanoHUB community. And typically they'll ask them, why do you come to nanoHUB? We, much like many gateways and hubs, are thinking strongly with the encouragement of our sponsors at NSF about sustainability. And so the MBA groups would include questions in their survey about willingness to pay for different services. But the summer intern that I came, I asked him to take all the data from the 3 MBA groups and compile it and look at it from a longitudinal standpoint. And he found that very difficult because each group asked slightly different survey questions. And it was very hard for him to coalesce that into one set of longitudinal data. And so the result of his summer internship was he developed a survey for us that we will use as a baseline. It's basic demographics, it's basic sustainability questions, a very low-touch survey, maybe 10 questions, that are the things we always ask, but we ask in slightly different ways. So this survey moving forward will form the core for any formal survey that we have moving forward, so we can truly track that longitudinal survey data. And one thing that I'll mention about that survey that was kind of fun, we found timing is important with these kind of surveys, particularly for a hub like nanoHUB that is tied very closely to educational use. Typically, when we run surveys, the majority of our users, like I said, are students. Our survey results came back The ages were skewed much higher to people 30s, 40s, 50s, and the professional capacity was skewed much more to educators and industry professionals. So by running this survey in the summer, we kind of caught a slightly different demographic than we typically do. So we have plans to run this baseline survey again in about 6 months during the school year and see if that changes. Communicating with our users, other ways that we do that, within the hub, we have ticketing system, we have wish lists, we have forums that are monitored. And then we have person-to-person outreach. And at nanoHUB, we're fortunate that we have a full-time outreach specialist. And she can, her chief duty is to engage with the community through a variety of different mechanisms, and I'll talk a little bit about that in our use case. And your goal in building this community and engaging with them is to continue to motivate your students or your users first to use. You want them to come to the gateway, to the hub. That is sort of the lowest hanging fruit. The next step is to get them to participate, to either collaborate with others or participate by using group functionality or answering questions in the forums. And then finally, the highest level of participation we would love to see is people creating content and contributing to the site. In the case of nanoHUB, all of our content is user supplied. So all of our tools, all of our other content are contributed by users. And we do enable some of that within Purdue. We have people working on tools and tool development. We have a production team that helps videotape good cutting-edge lecture material here at Purdue. But generally, all of the content on nanoHUB is user-supplied. So on that last slide, I had a question. You know, it's important as we build the community to understand what do users need. And our outreach specialist is Dr. Tanya Fulton. She is a specialist in materials science and materials engineering. So she not only comes to the users as an outreach specialist, but she can talk their talk. She's an engineer. And one of her strategies in engagement is to go to very carefully selected faculty and ask, how can we make your life easier? Faculty we aren't engaged with. And when Dr. Fulton does this, she's thinking a lot about demographics of our user community. She's thinking about where she sees holes in our content, holes in our usership, and she's trying to fill all those. She's trying to broaden demographics. She's trying to fill needs that exist. And so when she goes to those targeted faculty, she's looking, you know, that we may not have anyone in a particular area using nanoHUB in education, and she wants to know why. So she went to a faculty member at the University of Minnesota by the name of Dr. Beth Stadler. And she asked Dr. Stadler, how can we make your life easier? And Dr. Stadler responded almost immediately. Well, you know, I'd love to use simulation in my work. I'm an experimentalist. There's an open source code out there that would help, but it's very difficult for me to use. I don't want to install it. Maybe that could be something nanoHUB could help me with. Well, Tanya jumped on that, Dr. Fulton's. She went to the creators of that open source tool, and that's NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and contacted them and said, you know, we have experimentalists interested in your code. We'd love to have it on nanoHUB. Again, at nanoHUB, we're very careful to make sure that we don't have a lot of barriers in people's way. So she doesn't want to go to the NIST folks and say, you know, spend the next 4 weeks putting your code on nanoHUB. So again, we do summer internships. We participate in REU experiences for students. We have our own program with a cohort of about 20 students that come every summer, and they work on tool development. They work on putting tools up on nanoHUB or enabling new functionality and tools. So she went to the guys at NIST and said, you know, we'd love to have your tool. I have a summer student who can work on it. You know, can we get this going? Those NIST guys said, gosh, we'd love to have the tool on nanoHUB. In fact, we started doing it a while ago, you know, and we forgot about it. If someone would help us, we'd be glad to put it up. And by the end of that summer, not only did we have the tool called OOMPH up on nanoHUB, but that summer student actually worked on a precursor tool that would help build the input decks to OOMPH. So again, trying to lower those barriers. So impact story, why I like this particular story so much is it didn't stop there. Dr. Stadler asked for a tool, the NIST guys put it up, done. No, Tanya decided that it would be a good thing. This tool was not the simplest tool to use, and she thought that people would use it more and communicate and collaborate if they had a way for users to engage with each other. So she set up an active user group on nanoHUB called the nanoHUB OOMPH Users Group. And she made sure that she advertised this users group on the tool, on that precursor tool that did the input deck development. She made sure that any learning materials that we had on nanoHUB advertised this user group. And sure enough, that group became quite active. And we've got hundreds of user groups on nanoHUB, some way more active than others. So putting a user group up on nanoHUB doesn't, you know, it's if you build it, they will come, doesn't really work. You've got to put in the effort, like Tanya did, to make sure you advertise that group to get the growth. And as a result, we ended up with hundreds of users beginning to use this tool over the course of the first year. Likewise, over the course of the first year, we started to see citations coming in. I actually got an email contact from a user that said, hey, I wrote a paper, you know, about using this tool. I don't see it listed on nanoHUB. Is there a way I can get my paper listed on nanoHUB? And of course, through that process I mentioned at the beginning, the citation collection, we would have found that paper eventually, but it was so new we hadn't picked it up yet. So when that author came to me, I was able to push their paper to the front of our citations queue. And the other thing we tag those papers with is what tool was used. So once it is connected to the tool, it shows up as a reference, as a citation on the tool page. So this turns out to be a really nice win-win story. The nanoHUB users benefit. They get a new tool that's, you know, easy to use. It was out there, but it wasn't so easy to access. We're currently working to incorporate this tool into Jupyter Notebook, which will make it even yet more easy to use. And we've built this active user community to keep the tool use going. So a couple of final thoughts. As I said, you know, without a user community, you know, you've got an infrastructure sitting out in a vacuum. So you're engaging and understanding your user community is certainly critical to the success of the hub. There's a variety of ways to engage with the users, and some can offer big wins with moderate effort. This engagement that Tanya does, we are very fortunate that we have this outreach specialist, but she does it in a way that's very efficient and that doesn't pull it all back on us. So she involved the NIST people, she involved the faculty member. And then we look to leverage all these engagements. I was asked by an NSF program officer, well, this is a great story. How is it scalable? And the hope, the way it's scalable is now we've got Dr. Stadler. She's happy. She's using this tool. She's in a community we hadn't been engaged with before. We hope that she will become an ambassador to nanoHUB, and we get this, you know, I told two friends, and they told two friends, and so on and so on and so on, type of building out of these ambassadors. If they're excited and happy with what they're using, they're going to tell other people. They're certainly going to have their students using these tools, and our growth and our engagement will continue that way.